The cathedral had stood for 7 centuries before Viktor Valdris purchased it. Now it crumbled beautifully in the Welsh countryside, its Gothic spires piercing the perpetual mist, like accusations toward a heaven that had long since forgotten this place. Stone gargoyles wept green tears of moss, and the stained glass, what remained of it, cast fractured rainbows across floors that had not known the weight of worshippers for generations. Viktor stood at the window of what had once been the choir loft, now converted into his private study. The room held the accumulated weight of lifetimes, manuscripts in languages no longer spoken, paintings whose artists had turned to dust, centuries before museums thought to preserve their names, and relics from empires that had risen, flourished, and collapsed while he simply continued. He was tall, his frame carrying the kind of elegant leanness that suggested both refinement and danger. His hair, once dark as a raven's wing, had silvered at the temples over the past century, not from age, for his kind did not age, but from something deeper. Grief, perhaps, or the slow erosion of purpose that comes from watching everything you love turn to ash while you remain, unchanging, eternal. Outside, autumn had begun its slow surrender to winter. Leaves the color of dried blood drifted past the window, caught in winds that smelled of coming frost. Viktor had witnessed this same transformation 3,000 times, and still it moved something within him, some ancient memory of mortality, of seasons that had once meant something to a man who could die. The title they had given him, king, had always felt more like a burden than a crown. For 4 centuries he had ruled the scattered remnants of his kind, those who had survived the purges and the hunters and the slow, grinding erasure of belief. They came to him with their disputes, their fears, their endless hunger for guidance from one who had seen more darkness than any of them could imagine. But kingdoms, Viktor had learned, were fragile things. They required heirs. They required hope. And both had been stolen from him on a night 200 years past, when hunters had come for his wife and left him with nothing but ashes and the hollow throne of a dying race. He had not loved since, had not allowed himself the vulnerability of attachment. The others who served him, loyal, ancient, bound to him by blood and oath, understood. They kept their distance, respected his solitude, and waited for the slow extinction that seemed to be the destiny of their kind. Viktor turned from the window as the last light faded from the sky. The cathedral's shadows deepened around him like old friends, and he welcomed their embrace. In darkness, at least, he could forget the weight of centuries. In darkness, he could pretend that tomorrow might be different from the 1,000 tomorrows that had come before. It was then that he heard it, a sound that shattered the cathedral's ancient silence. The great doors below, iron-bound and heavy as grief, crashed open. Voices echoed through the nave, urgent and frightened. And beneath them, threading through the chaos like a crimson ribbon, Viktor caught the scent of blood. Not human blood. Something older. Something that made his dead heart constrict with a terror he had not felt in centuries. His blood. Viktor descended the spiral staircase with supernatural speed, his footsteps silent despite his haste. The nave stretched before him, vast and shadow-filled, its columns rising like the bones of some great leviathan. At its center, surrounded by 3 of his most trusted guards, lay a figure on a makeshift stretcher, Alexander, his son. The boy, though he had not been a boy for over a century, lay motionless, his face pale even by the standards of their kind. A wound gaped across his chest, deep and terrible, and from it seeped blood that glowed faintly silver in the darkness. Viktor's knees nearly buckled at the sight. "What happened?" His voice emerged as a whisper, but it carried through the cathedral like thunder. Marcus, the eldest of his guards, stepped forward. His face bore the drawn expression of one delivering news that could not be softened. "The order, my lord. They've returned. They ambushed us near the border. Alexander—" He paused, struggling with words. "He took a blade meant for me, silver-blessed and sanctified." Viktor knelt beside his son, his hand hovering over the wound without touching it. Silver-blessed weapons were designed to kill their kind slowly, painfully, allowing no healing. The metal's poison would spread through Alexander's body like frost through autumn leaves, consuming him from within. "How long?" Viktor asked. "Hours, perhaps, dawn at most." Viktor closed his eyes. He had buried his wife. He had watched civilizations crumble. He had endured torments that would shatter lesser beings. But this, watching his only child slip away, knowing that nothing in his vast power could prevent it, this was beyond bearing. "There is someone," Marcus said quietly. "A healer, a human." Viktor's eyes opened. "Humans cannot heal us. This one is different. She works at the hospital in the village, the night shift. The others speak of her with something like reverence. They say she has a gift, an intuition that borders on the supernatural. And more than that, Marcus hesitated. She has treated one of us before, a young one, injured and desperate, who stumbled into her ward. She did not scream. She did not call for hunters. She simply healed him. Viktor looked down at his son's face, so like his own, so like the wife he had lost. The decision was not a decision at all. Bring her. Elena Hartley had been a nurse for 15 years, and in that time she had learned that death had its own rhythm. It moved through hospital wards like a tide, predictable in its patterns yet always surprising in its specifics. She had held the hands of the dying, had whispered comfort to those crossing thresholds she could not follow, and had learned to find meaning in the small victories, the fever that broke, the wound that healed, the life that continued against all odds. Tonight, the hospital was quiet. The small Welsh village it served rarely produced emergencies, and the night shift had settled into its familiar routine of medication rounds and whispered conversations. Elena sat at the nurse's station, updating charts by the soft glow of a desk lamp, her auburn hair escaping its practical bun to frame a face that had known its share of sorrow. She was 38, though the gray threading through her hair suggested older. Life had not been gentle with her. A childhood marked by loss, a marriage that had ended in betrayal, and the quiet, persistent loneliness that came from being someone who saw too much, felt too deeply, and had learned to keep those gifts hidden. The boy who had come to her ward 6 months ago, the one with the impossible wound and the eyes that held centuries, had changed something in her. Not her beliefs exactly, for Elena had always suspected that the world held more than science could explain. Rather, it had confirmed what she had long felt in her bones, that she was meant for something beyond the ordinary boundaries of healing. When the stranger appeared at the end of the corridor, Elena felt no fear. He emerged from shadows that seemed too deep for the hospital's fluorescent lighting, tall and pale, and dressed in clothes that belonged to another era. His eyes, when they met hers, held an urgency that transcended words. "You are the healer," he said. It was not a question. Elena rose slowly, her heart beating steadily despite the impossibility before her. "I'm a nurse. You are more than that. You healed one of ours." The stranger took a step closer, and Elena could see now the desperation beneath his composure. "My master's son is dying, a silver blessed blade. Nothing we possess can save him, but you might." "How do you know I can help?" Elena asked, though something within her already knew the answer. The same instinct that had guided her hands when treating the impossible boy. The same quiet voice that had whispered truths she could not explain. "We don't," the stranger admitted. "But he is our prince, our hope, and you are our only chance." Elena thought of the boy she had healed, of his gratitude and his wonder when he realized she would not betray him. She thought of all the nights she had spent in this hospital, fighting against death's tide, and she understood that this was the moment toward which her entire life had been building. "Take me to him," she said. The cathedral rose from the mist like a dream of the medieval world, and Elena felt the weight of centuries pressing against her as she crossed its threshold. Candles burned in alcoves carved by hands long turned to dust, casting shadows that danced like remembered prayers. The air smelled of incense and old stone and something else, something metallic and ancient that she recognized from her years among the dying. The king waited beside his son's still form, and when he turned to face her, Elena understood why they called him such. He carried authority like a second skin, worn but undiminished, and his eyes held the kind of sorrow that could only accumulate across vast stretches of time. He was beautiful in the way that old statues are beautiful, perfect, cold, and infinitely sad. "You came," he said, and his voice held a note of wonder that seemed foreign to him. "Your man said someone was dying." Elena moved past him to kneel beside the young man on the stretcher. The wound was worse than she had imagined, a gash that seemed to glow with a sickly luminescence, its edges blackened and spreading. "How long has he been like this?" 3 hours, perhaps 4. Elena placed her hand near the wound, not touching, but close enough to feel the wrongness emanating from it. Her gift, if that was what it was, stirred within her, reaching toward the injured flesh like light-seeking darkness. "The silver is bonded to something," she murmured. "Not just the metal. There's a blessing, or a curse, something meant to consume from within." Viktor knelt across from her, his ancient eyes studying her face. "You can see it? I can feel it. It's like infection, but deeper. It's attacking his essence, not just his body." Elena met his gaze without flinching. "To heal him, I'll need to understand what he is, truly understand. No secrets, no evasions. For a long moment, Viktor said nothing. Then, slowly, he nodded. His name is Alexander. He is 147 years old. I turned him when he was 23, after a plague that would have taken him from me. He is... The king's voice faltered. He is all I have left of his mother, all I have left of hope. And you? Elena asked. How old are you? I was born in the year 973 of your calendar, in what is now Romania, in a village that no longer exists. I have been many things since then, warrior, scholar, monster, king. But I have never been a father who failed his son, and I will not begin tonight. Elena absorbed this impossible truth with the same calm she brought to every impossible case. 1,000 years, a millennium of nights, of hunger, of watching the world transform while remaining forever unchanged. She could not imagine such an existence, and yet she could see it in his eyes, the accumulated weight of all those years pressing down upon him like stone. I'll need blood, she said, his own if you have any preserved, and yours if not. Viktor's eyebrow rose. You understand our nature? I understand that blood is connection. It carries memory, identity, life itself. Whatever is poisoning him is targeting what makes him who he is. To fight it, we need to remind his body what it's fighting for. The king regarded her for a long moment, and Elena saw something shift in his ancient gaze, a flicker of recognition perhaps, or the first stirring of something that had long lain dormant. You are remarkable, he said softly. In 1,000 years, I have met perhaps a handful of humans who could look upon us without terror, but none who could look upon us and see clearly. We're wasting time, Elena replied, though she felt heat rise to her cheeks. The blood. Now. Viktor bared his wrist, and with a swift motion of his other hand's nail, opened a vein. The blood that flowed was darker than human blood, with that same faint silver luminescence she had seen in the wound. He let it pool in a chalice that Marcus brought forward, ancient silver, inscribed with symbols she could not read. Elena took the chalice and held it over Alexander's wound. She closed her eyes, reaching deep within herself for that quiet place where her gift resided. It had always been there, she realized now, a sensitivity to the borders between life and death, an intuition that knew where healing was needed before conscious thought could follow. She poured the blood in a thin stream over the blackened flesh, and as she did, she spoke, not in any language she knew, but in sounds that seemed to rise from somewhere ancient within her, words that felt like memory rather than invention. The blood hissed where it touched the wound, steam rising like prayers toward the vaulted ceiling. Alexander's body arched, a groan escaping his colorless lips. Viktor reached for his son, but Elena held up a hand to stop him. Not yet, she whispered. The battle is still being fought. She placed her palm directly on the wound, feeling the heat of conflict beneath her fingers. The silver poison pushed against her, cold and hungry, but she pushed back, not with force, but with something softer, compassion, understanding. The same energy she had poured into 1,000 dying patients, willing them back from the precipice. Time ceased to have meaning. Elena was vaguely aware of candles guttering, of the king's voice murmuring what might have been prayers in a language older than Latin, of her own heartbeat growing slower and slower as she poured herself into the healing. The cathedral's shadows pressed close, watching, waiting, and then, like dawn breaking over a battlefield, the poison began to retreat. Elena felt it give way beneath her hand, the cold malevolence receding, the blackened flesh beginning to knit itself back together. Alexander's breathing, which had been shallow and irregular, deepened into something like natural sleep. The wound, still present but no longer spreading, had lost its sickly glow. She withdrew her hand and nearly collapsed. Strong arms caught her. Viktor, his face a mask of wonder, and something else she could not name. You saved him, he breathed. In 1,000 years, I have never witnessed such a thing. Elena's vision swam, exhaustion pressing down upon her like a physical weight. He'll need more care, she managed. The wound won't heal completely for days, maybe weeks. But the poison is gone. Viktor guided her to a chair, an ancient thing of carved wood that had probably belonged to some long-dead bishop, and knelt before her. For a moment, the king of vampires looked like nothing more than a father overwhelmed with gratitude. How? He asked. How did you know what to do? Elena shook her head slowly. I didn't. I just listened. To him, to you, to whatever voice has always guided me when death comes close. She met his eyes, and in them she saw not a monster, not a king, but a being as lost and lonely as she had always been. Your son called out for help, and I answered. That's what healers do. In the days that followed, Elena returned to the cathedral each night after her hospital shift. She told herself it was purely medical necessity. Alexander's wound required monitoring, and his recovery would be fragile for some time. But she knew, in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, that her reasons ran deeper. The cathedral had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where the rules that governed ordinary life seemed to pause at the threshold. Within its ancient walls, Elena found herself asking questions she had never dared voice before, about death and what lay beyond it, about the nature of the soul, about whether immortality was a blessing or a curse. Viktor answered what he could. His voice, when he spoke of his past, carried the weight of witness rather than nostalgia. He told her of the Black Death, of watching entire villages succumb while he walked untouched among the corpses. He spoke of the Renaissance, of meeting artists whose names would echo through centuries, of the terrible loneliness of being the only constant in a world that never stopped changing. I watched them build this cathedral, he said one night, gesturing to the vaulted ceiling above them. I was there when they laid the first stone, a young thing by my people's standards, still believing that immortality was a gift. I returned when they completed it, a century later, and already I had begun to understand the truth. Which is, Elena asked, that we are not given eternity. We are sentenced to it. He turned to look at her, and the candlelight caught the silver in his temples. Every connection we form, every love we allow ourselves, becomes a wound waiting to happen. Humans are beautiful precisely because they end. We are tragic because we do not. Elena considered this. She thought of her own life, her failed marriage, her parents who had died when she was young, the friends who had drifted away as the years accumulated their distances. Mortality had not protected her from loss. It had only ensured that she, too, would eventually become a loss for someone else. "Tell me about your wife," she said softly. Viktor was silent for so long that Elena thought he would not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Her name was Anastasia. She was a noblewoman in Russia, the daughter of a count who had the misfortune of hosting me during a winter journey. I was already ancient by then, already convinced that love was a weakness I could not afford. But she... He paused, and Elena saw something like pain flicker across his eternal features. She saw through me, just as you do. She looked at me and did not see a monster or a king. She saw a man who was drowning in his own endless existence, and she threw herself into the water beside me. "You turned her," Elena said. It was not a question. She asked me to. For 3 years she asked, and for 3 years I refused. I told her what it would mean. The hunger, the darkness, the endless watching as everyone she loved turned to dust. But she was stubborn. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She said that eternity without me would be worse than any darkness with me. So I gave her what she asked for. "And she gave you Alexander," Elena said. "Our kind cannot bear children in the traditional sense. But Alexander was dying, a plague that swept through the village where we were staying. He was a young man, brilliant and kind, the son of the local physician. Anastasia loved him like her own child. When the sickness took hold, she begged me to save him, and I could not refuse her." Viktor's hands clenched at his sides. 200 years later, hunters came for her, silver and fire and prayers to a god who had long since abandoned his creation. I arrived too late. All that remained was ash and the memory of her face. Elena reached out and placed her hand over his. His skin was cool, but not cold, more like marble that had spent a day in the shade. He looked at her touch with something like astonishment. "I'm sorry," she said. "That's inadequate, I know. Nothing can heal that kind of loss." "No," Viktor agreed. "But perhaps, in time, one can learn to carry it." His fingers turned beneath hers, lacing together in a gesture that felt both impossibly intimate and perfectly natural. "You are the first person in 2 centuries who has made me believe that might be true." Alexander recovered slowly, as Elena had predicted. Within a week, he could sit up. Within 2, he could walk short distances. The wound had scarred over, leaving a mark like a silver starburst across his chest, a permanent reminder of how close he had come to true death. He was nothing like his father, Elena discovered. Where Viktor was grave and measured, Alexander was quick to laugh, eager to engage, filled with a curiosity about the modern world that his father had long since lost. He asked her endless questions about medicine, about technology, about the strange rituals of human courtship he observed in the television programs Marcus sometimes watched. "Father says you have a gift," Alexander told her one evening as she checked his wound with gentle fingers. He says you carry light inside you. Elena smiled, though she felt heat rise to her cheeks. Your father is very kind. Father is never kind, Alexander replied with a grin. He is honest to the point of cruelty. If he says you carry light, then you do. I've seen it myself. When you healed me, it was like dawn breaking, like the first sunrise I ever witnessed after my turning. His expression grew serious. You know what that means, don't you? I don't understand. Light is precious to us. We are creatures of darkness, Elena. But we remember light. We remember warmth. We spend our eternities searching for it in whatever forms we can find. Art, music, the company of those we love. Alexander's eyes, so like Viktor's, held hers with an intensity that belied his playful nature. Father has been in darkness for 200 years. Since my mother died, he has refused to seek the light. Until you. Elena said nothing, but her heart, her fragile mortal heart, beat faster in her chest. The order struck 3 weeks after Alexander's initial injury. Elena was at the hospital when it happened, completing her rounds with the particular attention she had always given to her patients. She did not see the black vans that surrounded the cathedral or the men in tactical gear who emerged from them carrying silver-blessed weapons. She did not hear the prayers they chanted as they approached the ancient doors, nor the crash of those doors giving way under their assault, but she felt it, a sudden terrible wrongness that seized her chest and stole her breath. She dropped the chart she was holding and ran, ignoring the startled calls of her colleagues, driven by an instinct deeper than thought. By the time she reached the cathedral, flames were licking at the stained glass windows. Elena burst through the side entrance, the one Viktor had shown her, hidden behind a tangle of winter-dead vines, and found herself in the middle of chaos. Smoke billowed through the nave, thick and acrid, while figures moved through the haze like ghosts at war. She heard the clash of weapons, the cries of the wounded, and above it all, Viktor's voice raised in a language that sounded like thunder made verbal. She found Alexander in the choir loft, backed into a corner by 3 hunters. His wound had reopened, silver blood streaming down his chest, and though he fought with desperate strength, it was clear he was failing. One of the hunters raised a stake, silver-tipped and gleaming. Elena did not think. She seized a fallen candelabrum, heavy iron, ancient and ornate, and swung it with all the strength her mortal body possessed. The hunter crumpled, and in the moment of confusion that followed, she grabbed Alexander's arm and pulled him toward the hidden passage. "My father!" Alexander gasped. "Elena, my father is still—" "I know." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I'll go back for him, but you have to get out. Your wound will heal." Alexander gripped her arm with surprising strength. "But if you go back there, you will die. You are human, Elena, fragile, precious. My father would never forgive himself if—" "Your father," Elena said quietly, "has been sentenced to eternity. The least I can do is ensure he doesn't spend it alone." She pushed Alexander toward the passage and turned back toward the flames. Viktor stood at the center of the nave, surrounded by the bodies of fallen hunters. His clothes were torn, silver burns marking his arms and face. But he stood unbowed, a king defending his kingdom, even as that kingdom crumbled around him. More hunters approached, their prayers rising above the roar of the fire, their weapons glinting in the hellish light. Elena emerged from the smoke like an apparition, her hair wild, her face streaked with ash. Viktor's eyes widened at the sight of her. "What are you doing?" His voice cracked with something that might have been terror. "Elena, you must leave." "I'm not leaving you." She moved to stand beside him, facing the approaching hunters with nothing but her own mortal courage. "Alexander is safe. The others have scattered. It's only us now." "Then you should scatter too." Viktor's hand found hers, gripping it with desperate intensity. "Elena, please, I have lost too much. I cannot lose you." The leader of the hunters stepped forward, a tall man with the zealot's fire burning in his eyes. "The Vampire King," he said, almost reverently. "We have hunted your kind for generations, and finally you stand before us. Surrender, demon, and we will grant you a clean death. Your human consort need not suffer if she renounces you now." Elena stepped forward, placing herself between Viktor and the hunter. "This man," she said, her voice carrying clear above the crackling flames, "has lived for 1,000 years. In that time, he has loved, he has lost, he has suffered in ways you cannot imagine. He has watched your churches rise and fall, your empires bloom and wither. He has seen the best and worst of humanity, and still he chooses restraint over destruction. He is a monster," the hunter spat, a drinker of blood, a creature of darkness. He is a father who nearly lost his son. Elena's voice softened but did not waver. He is a widower who has carried his grief for 2 centuries. He is a king who protects his people not through violence but through wisdom. She met the hunter's eyes with the same unflinching gaze she had given Viktor on that first night. What are you beside all that? A man with a weapon, killing what he doesn't understand. Where is the righteousness in that? The hunter raised his crossbow, silver bolt gleaming. Step aside, woman, my quarrel is not with you. It is now, Elena replied, because I will not move. The moment stretched like taffy, time itself seeming to hold its breath. Then, from the darkness beyond the fire, a voice spoke, ancient and powerful, and carrying the weight of centuries. You would murder a healer in a house of God? From the shadows emerged figures Elena did not recognize. Vampires, she realized, but old ones, their faces carrying the particular stillness that came only with extreme age. They moved without sound, surrounding the hunters with the casual grace of predators who had long since ceased to fear their prey. The council, Viktor breathed. The eldest of them, a woman whose beauty suggested ancient Egypt, stepped forward. We have watched, Viktor Valdris. We have seen what this human has done for your son, and we have seen what she has done tonight, standing beside you when flight would have been the wiser choice. Her ancient eyes moved to Elena, assessing. Such courage is rare, such loyalty, rarer still. The hunter's crossbow wavered. He was surrounded now, outmatched, his righteous certainty crumbling in the face of odds that no amount of faith could overcome. Go, the ancient woman said to him. Take your brothers and go. Tell your order that the vampire king is under the council's protection. Tell them that any who move against him move against us all. And tell them that the healer... Her smile was cold and beautiful and terrifying. The healer is not to be touched, ever. The hunters retreated, their formation breaking as they fled into the night. The fire had begun to consume the cathedral's ancient timbers, smoke billowing toward the vaulted ceiling, but the immediate danger had passed. Viktor turned to Elena, his face a mask of emotions too complex to name. You could have died, he said. You foolish, brave, impossible woman. You could have died. So could you, Elena replied. That's rather the point, isn't it? They stood in the ruins of the cathedral as dawn approached, the ancient stones still smoking, the stained glass shattered beyond repair. Much had been lost, relics, manuscripts, the accumulated treasures of 1,000 years. But the foundations remained, stubborn and solid, and Viktor's people had already begun to speak of rebuilding. Elena sat on a fallen column, exhaustion finally claiming her now that the adrenaline had faded. Viktor stood nearby, his silver-burned skin slowly healing, watching the first pale light appear on the eastern horizon. You should go inside, Elena said. The sun will not kill me. Viktor's smile was weary but genuine. That is a myth, one we have cultivated carefully. Sunlight weakens us, it is true, but it takes far more than a few rays to destroy one of my age. He turned to look at her, and in his ancient eyes she saw something new, something that looked almost like hope. Elena, what you did tonight was necessary, she finished. I told you, I'm a healer. I go where the hurt is. You are more than that. He moved to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. You are a miracle. In 1,000 years, I had forgotten that such things existed, that there were still beings in this world capable of seeing past the darkness to the light within. Everyone has light within them, Elena said. You just have to know how to look for it. Viktor was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat and withdrew something small and glittering, a vial of liquid that seemed to glow with its own inner fire, shifting between crimson and gold as it caught the growing light. Do you know what this is? He asked. Elena shook her head, though something in her chest tightened at the sight of it. It is called the eternal gift. It is not blood, not exactly. It is essence, distilled from the oldest of our kind over centuries. When given freely, it can transform a human completely, granting them true immortality without the years of gradual change that normally follow a turning. Viktor held the vial up to the light, watching the liquid dance within. I have carried it for 400 years. Anastasia made me promise to use it only on someone worthy, someone who could walk beside me through the endless dark without losing themselves to it. Viktor, Elena's voice was barely a whisper. I am not asking you to take it, he said quickly. I am not even offering it, not yet. I am simply telling you that it exists, that if you wished, you could be more than mortal, you could be eternal. He met her eyes, and in his gaze she saw all the loneliness of 1,000 years, all the hope of a single night. You could be mine, and I could be yours, for as long as the stars burn in the sky. Elena reached out and took his hand. His skin was cool beneath her fingers, but no longer cold. It had warmed somehow in the time they had spent together. Or perhaps she had simply learned to find warmth in places others could not. "I'm not afraid of eternity," she said. "I'm not afraid of darkness. I spent my whole life in hospitals, watching people fight against death, watching them lose. I know what mortality means. The fear, the grief, the desperate clinging to moments that slip through your fingers like water." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But I also know what immortality would mean. Watching everyone I love turn to dust, just as you have, carrying that weight forever." "Yes," Viktor agreed. "That is the price. But you wouldn't ask me to carry it alone?" It was not a question. Never. His hand tightened on hers. "I have been alone for 2 centuries, Elena. It nearly destroyed me. If you choose this path, I will walk it beside you, every step, every century, every moment of darkness, and every glimpse of light." Elena looked at the vial in his other hand, at the liquid that promised eternity. She thought of her empty apartment, her solitary life, the decades ahead filled with hospital shifts and small victories against an enemy that would eventually claim her too. She thought of Viktor's face when she had first seen him, ancient, sorrowful, beautiful. She thought of Alexander's laughter, of the cathedral shadows that had felt more like home than anywhere she had ever known. "I need time," she said finally. "This is not a decision to make in the shadow of fire and battle. It's a choice that will echo through centuries. I want to make it with clear eyes and a full heart." Viktor smiled, a true smile, one that reached his ancient eyes and made them glow like amber in the gathering light. "Time," he said, "is the one thing I have in abundance. Take what you need. I will be here." "Waiting?" Elena asked. "Hoping," he corrected. "For the first time in 200 years, Elena Hartley, I am hoping." A year passed, then another. Elena continued her work at the hospital, but now her nights belonged to the cathedral. Viktor's people had rebuilt it, stone by stone, incorporating modern safety measures while preserving the ancient architecture. The stained glass had been replaced with new windows, some depicting traditional saints, others showing scenes of darkness and light intertwined, commissioned from an artist who understood that beauty could be found in shadows. She learned the names of Viktor's people, their histories, their sorrows. She helped Alexander study medicine, watching with pride as he discovered a passion for healing that matched her own. She sat with Viktor through long nights, listening to stories of centuries past, sharing her own small stories of mortal life, finding in the contrast something like harmony. And on the 2nd anniversary of the night she had first entered the cathedral, Elena made her choice. She found Viktor in his study, surrounded by books and languages she was only beginning to learn. He looked up as she entered, and in his eyes she saw the question he had never stopped asking, the hope he had never let die. "I'm ready," she said. Viktor rose slowly, his movements carrying the weight of the moment. "Elena, are you certain? Once done, this cannot be undone. You will leave behind everything you have known, sunlight, warmth, the simple pleasures of mortal existence." "I know." She crossed the room to stand before him, this ancient king who had become her dearest friend, her confidant, her love. "I've had 2 years to think about it, 2 years to watch you carry your eternity, to see how Alexander and the others find meaning in their endless nights. I've asked myself every question, considered every fear." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that centuries had carved there, not of age, but of emotion, of experience, of life lived beyond measure. "And I keep coming back to the same answer, which is that love is worth any price, that connection is worth any darkness, that walking beside you through eternity is worth leaving behind a mortality that only ever made me lonely." She smiled, and in her smile was all the light he had ever seen in her, warm, healing, infinite. "I choose you, Viktor Valdris. I choose us. I choose forever." Viktor's hands trembled as he withdrew the vial, still glowing, still waiting, after all these years. "It will hurt," he warned. "The transformation is not gentle." "Pain passes," Elena replied. "We remain." He uncorked the vial, and the scent that emerged was unlike anything Elena had ever experienced. Blood and starlight and the memory of gardens that had flourished before humanity took its first steps. He raised it to her lips, his eyes never leaving hers. "To eternity," he whispered. "To us," she answered, and drank. The cathedral stands still, 7 centuries and counting, its spires reaching toward a heaven that has finally remembered this place. Within its walls, a new court has formed, not just of vampires, but of humans who have chosen to serve, to learn, to exist in the liminal space between mortal and immortal. Elena walks its corridors now as queen, though she insists the title is merely ceremonial. She has kept her work at the hospital, adapting to the night shift permanently, using her enhanced senses and eternal patience to save lives that might otherwise be lost. Alexander has joined her there, his centuries of accumulated knowledge combined with her natural gift, creating a partnership that has begun to change how the medical world thinks about healing. Viktor watches from the shadows, as he always has, but now there is light in his ancient eyes. He has begun to write again, chronicles of the centuries he has witnessed, histories that the human world has long forgotten. Elena reads his pages each dawn, before sleep claims them both, and in his words she finds the man she fell in love with, wounded, wise, eternally searching for meaning in a world that offers so little. They do not know what the coming centuries will bring. The order still exists, though weakened. Other threats lurk in the darkness, drawn by the rumor of a vampire king who has taken a human bride. The council watches with interest that borders on suspicion, uncertain what to make of this union that defies so many of their ancient laws. But tonight, as the moon rises full and silver over the Welsh hills, none of that matters. Viktor and Elena stand at the window of the choir loft, hand in hand, watching the mist roll through the valley below. Somewhere in the cathedral, Alexander is laughing at something Marcus has said. Somewhere in the world, people are being born and dying and falling in love, unaware that in this ancient place, two souls have found each other across the vast divide of mortality. "Do you regret it?" Viktor asks, as he asks every night, not from doubt, but from wonder. He cannot quite believe that she is here, that she chose this, that after 1,000 years of solitude, he is no longer alone. Elena turns to him, and in her eyes, golden now, flecked with ancient light, he sees the same woman who stood before hunters and refused to move, the same woman who reached into the darkness of his son's wound and pulled him back from death, the same woman who looked upon a monster and saw only a man. "Never," she says, "not for a single moment, not for a single century." She reaches up to kiss him, and in that kiss is all the weight of the years behind them and all the promise of the years ahead. The cathedral keeps its ancient watch around them, stone and shadow, and the memory of prayers. The moon traces its eternal path across the sky, and two hearts that no longer beat find rhythm with each other, as they will for all the eternities to come. In the end, immortality is not about endless time. It is about finding someone worth sharing that time with. It is about choosing connection over isolation, love over safety, light over the comfortable darkness of solitude. Elena had spent her mortal life as a healer, fighting against death's tide. Now, as an immortal, she understood the deeper truth. Healing was never about defeating death. It was about making life, in whatever form it took, for however long it lasted, worth living. And in the arms of a king who had waited 1,000 years for her, in the shadow of a cathedral that had watched empires rise and fall, in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, Elena Hartley had finally found her home. The story continues, as all true stories do, in the whispers of the dark and the patience of the eternal. It echoes through centuries yet unwritten, through loves yet undiscovered, through the endless dance of light and shadow that defines existence. And somewhere, in a cathedral that has stood for 7 centuries and will stand for 7 more, a vampire king and his healer queen watch the night unfold, their hands intertwined, their hearts forever bound. Together, they wait for dawn. Together, they welcome the darkness. Together, they remain.